My guests today are husband and wife couple Kristy Shen and Bryce Leung, who are early retirees and long-term nomadic travelers. They used to live and work as engineers in the tech industry in Toronto, which is one of the most expensive cities in Canada, and they decided against conventional advice about homeownership, which we'll talk a little bit about in a moment, and instead invested their savings, growing it into a seven-figure portfolio, and this allowed them to retire in their early 30s to travel the world. Their fire story has been featured in the New York Times, CNBC, and the UK Independent, among other publications. And they now help other millennials with early retirement strategy by providing financial coaching and personal finance content on their website, millennialrevolution.com. They've also written a best-selling book called Quit Like a Millionaire, which is, in their words, a step-by-step guide on how to invest safely to retire early and travel the world, published by Penguin Random House. Kristy and Bryce, thanks so much for joining us today to share your story, advice, and tips about early retirement from an engineering career.
Hi, thanks for having us.
All right, I've been looking forward to this interview for a while because I've been a long time follower of your fire journey and your blog. It was one of the earlier blogs that I ran into, so really excited to chat with you guys. I've enjoyed reading a lot of the content you put out. But just to orient our audience who might not be as familiar with your story, in what year did you early retire? And how old were you?
Yeah, so it's June 2015. We both became financially independent when we were 31. And then we stayed a little bit longer, about 6 months, to help out with work. And then that's when we officially quit in 2016 in June at the ages of 32 to travel the world.
And what was your career path before retiring? I know engineers, but what was, like, I guess, a little bit more detail on what you were doing in your career?
Yeah, so I worked on software development, mostly web development, and then Bryce worked on.
We were both computer engineers, and I worked in software doing are you familiar with FPGAs, or field programmable gateways?
No.
Okay, so it's like a silicon. It's like a chip company. So I wrote the software that helped design chips and that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Got it.
That company later got bought out by Intel, so it no longer exists.
Okay, got it. So you guys were basically software engineers, software developers for nearly a decade. Is that right? Before
yes.
You found the trigger?
Correct.
Yeah, 9 years.
Got it. So I understand that when you hit $1 million in savings, sort of reading on your blog, you quit your jobs to travel the world initially for a year. But I'd love to understand, like, when did that decision shift to simply retiring early for good? Like, was there a single moment of recognition? Was it a gradual realization? What was the thought process?
I didn't think we were going to travel the world. I thought we were just going to leave for a year, maybe do a victory lap to go to some places we wanted to visit, and then come back and settle in Canada in a cheap place that is not Toronto. And what ended up happening was we continued traveling for the last 5 years because we found out it was actually less expensive to travel the world than actually come back to settle in Canada. A lot of this actually wasn't planned. It was really just, even quitting my job was kind of scary, because even though we did the math over and over again, I had a slight mini panic attack when I gave in my notice, because, you know, once you've kind of been in the same industry for 10 years, that's really a big part of your identity. It's really hard to give it up and just say, okay, now I'm going to be traveling the world. And then, you know, so a lot of that came from just trial and experience. Like, what's going to happen after we quit? Let's try and see. And if we don't like it, maybe we'll go back to work, and it'll just be a gap year. And then we really liked it. And I can't ever imagine ever going back to work again. I would be completely useless as an employee. Yeah. And how about you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So how the math works out is that, so early retirement and the financial independence, people use something called the 4% rule. And how that works is that you take whatever portfolio that you are planning on retiring on, you multiply that by 4%, and that's how much you can safely withdraw from your portfolio every year without depleting it. And so with $1 million portfolio, that supported our projected retirement budget of $40,000 a year. And we went off and we saved up a little bit more extra money, and we said, okay, let's just blow some more money and travel around the world. And we were expecting to spend double that, $75,000 to $80,000. To our surprise, when we came back around and landed back in Canada, we added up all of the budget that we had spent, or all the money that we had spent, and it was around $40,000. And it was just like, oh, we could just keep doing this forever. And that's when the light bulb moment clicked. And then we went and bought a ticket to Japan like the next day.
Oh, wow. Got it. Wow. That was a a quick turnaround. I'm curious, like, what was the life that you envisioned having in retirement after crossing over to the promised land? At the first, I guess I'd love to get two perspectives. One is the original version where you would take a gap year and then settle in a less expensive city in Canada, and then how that changed when you decided to travel. Like, what was the life you envisioned?
I think I'm naturally a pessimist,
Right.
and you're naturally an optimist.
Sure.
So my vision was probably more on like whether it was, I was a little worried, like what's going to happen? Am I going to have anything to do? Am I going to watch all these other people get ahead in their careers and I'm just going to stagnate? Am I actually even going to like retirement? So I didn't really want to think about it too hard because I was pretty burnt out working in a high stress environment for the last 10 years. So I just really wanted a break. And I tried to keep my mind focused on the present and not to think too much into the future. But I think there was always that little voice in the back of my head that's like, what if this turns out to be horrible? What if I really hate retirement? What if I'm really bored? What if I get depressed? What if all these other people get ahead of me and then I'm going to feel like I'm completely useless? In reality, it was actually way beyond my wildest dreams, but it didn't happen in the way that I like, even if I had been an optimist, I couldn't have predicted everything that would have happened, because the first year we were traveling the world, we did some volunteering and making an app for a nonprofit. And then the second year we started like around almost like at the end of the first year, we started the blog. So within the second year, we were doing a lot of blogging, and then that ended up taking off. I totally did not imagine that in a million years that would happen. And then that led to us writing the book. So editor from Penguin Random House came to us to ask us to write the book. And then after that, then we got asked to speak at a whole bunch of financial conferences. And just all these crazy things happened that I never would have expected. I would have been like, I'm just going to sit here and drink some pina coladas on the beach and then maybe read a couple books. Like, that's as far as I could think. Never in a million years would I have imagined a book deal or any of these, speaking gigs or anything like that.
And it keeps spiraling. Like, opportunities create more opportunities. Like right now we're locked down because of COVID, but at the beginning of the year, we were like, because we had to pull out our old schedule for something else, and we were just kind of like, wow, we had a lot of stuff going on, because it was like we were going to be flying into LA to be part of a documentary about women and entrepreneurship or something like that. Yeah. And then after that, we were going to be in Austin, Texas for a Google talk that we were giving. And then after that, we were going to be speaking at a conference called Financial Freedom Summit. And and then after that, it was like all these like different appearances that we were going to do. And then we're going to like fly to LA and like maybe make a TV show. Everything got shut down. So right now we're in this weird state that we haven't been since before retirement, where we're just kind of like, what are we doing today? Nothing. So that was not intentional. Gotcha.
Wow. So it sounds like there's been a lot of organic opportunities that have materialized. Have these been mostly inbound at this point? Because like folks in the fire community, obviously know who you are, or has there been a mix of inbound and outbound?
Yeah, it's mostly organic, kind of random people talking to us and kind of saying, hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? That kind of stuff. Yeah, because the blog and the book has now grown to the point where we are kind of like well known enough that sometimes we recognize on the street, which is still a little weird for us, that people just come up to me like, oh my God, I read your book and I love your blog, and we're just kind of like, really? Okay. So that in and of itself is kind of like, we're not seeking out opportunities; they are just mostly just coming to us. But that wasn't intentional. I thought that after I retired, I was going to make an app and try to make it as entrepreneur, like one of those Silicon Valley app guys. That's what I thought I was going to do, because I did software development my entire life. The desire to write a blog was kind of, where did the idea come from? It came from you yelling at your dad, right?
It was the frustration of two things. One, people in Toronto saying like, oh, if you don't buy a house, you're going to be priced out forever and everybody needs to buy a house. Meanwhile, the people who have bought houses are constantly complaining about how much they hate their house, even if their money has doubled, they're still complaining. Like, they're still not happy. So I'm like, well, you're not happy when you don't buy it. You're not happy when you buy it. So what is it that you're supposed to do? So that was from a frustration of buying a house is not the only way to live your life. And another one from my parents specifically, because your parents are generally relatively supportive. My parents are more traditional. My parents going like, oh, you're a millionaire? Well, you don't have a house. So like, who cares? So, you know, and even like from that background, like my parents, like immigrants, first generation immigrants, like my dad cares so much about working hard and being dedicated to a company that he ran inside to his office during an earthquake while everybody else was fleeing because he needed to get work done. So that's like my dad. And then, so when we went traveling the world and like all this media attention came in, he was still like, you need to get back to work. Here is a list of companies I found that would be a good fit for you, and get your ass back to work now. So it was a little bit of that frustration of like, okay, come on, like you guys, like parents, we love you, but you don't always know what you're talking about. And buying a house is not the only way to live your life.
Yeah, because her dad, like, you know, this the Chinese parents archetype.
I
know it well.
They didn't know what to brag to their friends about what his daughter did. So he was like, so he didn't know what to say. So he was just kind of like, well, they have to do something, otherwise I can't tell my friends.
Number one to retirement, isn't that, Brad? Doesn't that carry bragging rights?
You know, the funny thing is, it took a year or two for him to finally accept that this is something that's actually a big deal. Mm-hmm. And the only reason why they did that is because we went all around the world, did all this media attention, like, and then appeared in all these like newspapers, and then his friends started seeing the newspapers and then bringing it to him and saying like, "Is this your daughter?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Wow, that's amazing! My kid just keeps asking me for money like this all the time, right?" So via groupthink, because his friends started convincing him that what we did was actually a good thing, then he started kind of coming around and saying like, maybe she's not an idiot after all.
Yeah, so basically, in order for your Asian parents to finally accept that you're not an idiot, all you need to do is become a millionaire, retire in your 30s, travel the world, be in all these media, and then finally be published by one of the biggest publishing houses in the world. And then maybe they'll think that you're not an idiot.
Actually, the funny thing is, even when the book got published and even after it became a bestseller, they were still skeptical. They're like, I don't know, is this a good, like, I don't know, it's like, does this have low standards or something like that? And then Japan bought the rights to the translation rights to the book and then republished it in Japan. And only then were they convinced, because they're like, oh, the Japanese, they don't do anything.
They have standards.
They have hugely high standards. So it took another Asian country to validate what we did to them in a way that made sense.
Oh dear. Oh my goodness. Wow.
And you wonder why I have anxiety issues.
Well, I definitely want to probe more on this here in a moment, but I guess first I'd love to understand, how did you guys come up with your FIRE number? Like, what considerations went into it? How did you calculate the burn rate you would need to live on? And factoring in some inherently, I guess, unpredictable things like travel, accommodation, food are, I guess, somewhat predictable, but there are unexpected expenses that you might want to prepare for as well, buffer that you might want to cushion in. How did you guys come up with your FIRE number?
Well, okay, so the short answer is using the 4% rule. So by keeping meticulous tracking of our expenses, so she is a huge spreadsheet nerd, and every transaction goes into it, and she can slice and dice the data using pivot charts and stuff. So using all this like spending data, we were able to kind of say, okay, we spend about $35,000 to $40,000 a year. So taking the worst case number from that, which is $40,000, and then dividing it by 4%, which is the same as multiplying by 25, that becomes your base target number of $1 million. But it wasn't just that. We wanted to have backup systems in place, because we're engineers. So we wanted to make sure that the system was stable and robust in case that there was a market downturn like that hit right after we retired. So on top of that, we calculated what we call like a cash cushion amount, which the math, you can, if your readers are interested, they can look at our book, and we say exactly how we calculated that. But we saved up a little bit more money, and just keeping in cash, just to be able to tide us over for an extended period of time in which the stock markets were going down, like right now. So right now, we are very, very glad that stock markets are like having a cow right now. We're very, very glad that we have that cash cushion in place, because the worst thing that you want to do, that you can do in retirement, is when stock markets are going down, selling at a loss in order to cover your living expenses.
Yeah. So one of the other things we do, so we talk about something we call the 3-bucket strategy, and we have like all the charts and the diagrams in the book. But basically the high level explanation is that we have this forward looking system where the money that we're currently living on, we actually accumulated that from yield of our portfolio last year. So like things like the bond interest, things like dividends, things like the income from real estate investment trusts. So all of that was accumulated last year, so that this year we don't have to predict, okay, do we need to sell now? Like, when is our dividends going to come in? Is it going to be delayed? What about bond interest? All that stuff. We already have that money from last year. So every single year you're future projecting, so that you're accumulating the money we're accumulating this year is for next year. So then you don't have to be like rushing, and any kind of unexpected things, you already took care of that last year.
We're probably one of the most conservative, pessimistic people in the fire space, because we're both engineers. So we always want to have a backup plan B, C, D, E, and that kind of stuff.
So is it fair to say, it sounds like you have a cash cushion. Each year you're forecasting the next year's expenses and adding it to that cash cushion, and then during the year you spend it down. But if there's a down year, then your cash cushion can theoretically tide you over. Like, maybe you don't even need to sell anything in a down year because you have that cash cushion. Am I putting the two pieces together correctly?
Correct. So our cash cushion that we have stored outside is able to sustain us for 3 straight years of down. And we kind of arrived at that number because that was, I think, the longest period of stock markets going down in a row since the Great Depression or something like that. So we're like, okay, that's a pretty good guide.
Gotcha. Cool. Makes sense. So how did you guys stay focused and keep your eye on the ball when, I imagine, as you alluded to earlier, many of your engineering classmates were probably starting to upgrade their lifestyles, buy homes, cars, start families, etc., while you were saving up for this fire journey?
It was definitely not easy. We had a lot of coworkers and friends and family members tell us, like, there's no way you can't not buy a car. Like, that's crazy. How do you like just take public transportation all the time? That's insane. You can't live without a car. And then other people upgrading their houses, moving into condos, and then selling the condo, moving into a house, and then constantly getting pressure from our parents to buy a house, especially since your mom used to be a real estate agent.
Yeah.
Try telling someone who used to be a real estate agent that you don't want to buy a house.
So it's
good luck with that.
So it's Chinese parents who are also in real estate. So the pressure was quite high.
Enormous. So I think part of it was also because of my upbringing. So I wasn't actually born in the West. I was born in a rural village in China. So having that kind of perspective on life and like growing up with very little, you kind of just realize you don't really need a lot to be happy. And then when I actually came to Canada afterwards, I was like amazed by everything. Like, I'm not the kind of person that would be like, oh, this person has this house, but I don't have a fancy condo. I need that. For me, it was just like, wow, there's running water and you have 4 walls and there's heating. What is this crazy wonderland of abundance, right? So to me, it was, I tend to need very little to be happy. So for me, it was just basically like, can we spend time together? Do we have enough money to like travel and do kind of the things that we like to do? And outside of that, like, I don't need a car. I don't need a fancy condo. I'll rent an older apartment that's like, 30 minutes by subway from our work. No big deal. And do I need new furniture? No, like just buy used furniture. That's totally fine for me. And it just didn't bother me at all. I never really thought about it that much. I think also I did, although to be fair, there was one period in which I almost got into the whole like status thing by buying purses. Like, that was my deepest shame with trying to like buy Coach purses and like upgrade to like Louis Vuitton, like that kind of thing. And also I thought that our apartment was really small at one point because I had accumulated all these things on sale, because you can't afford not to buy it when it's on sale. And then to his credit, he decided, like, he didn't say like, oh no, we can't upgrade our apartment. We can't live in a bigger place. You need to get rid of all of your stuff. He basically just said, okay, let's go and look at other apartments and then see if there's anything you like, and then figure out, the square footage, do a comparison, all that stuff. And because I'm obsessed with mathing shit up, we went around and I looked at all the different apartments, and I realized we are paying rent that is way below value, like way undervalued. We would have to upgrade our expenses by 50% in order to just get like something similar or just slightly bigger. And then I added the cost of all the things I would need to get rid of in order to make our current apartment livable. And it was way more. Just like 1 month of extra rent would have paid for all those things all over again, right? So I was like, okay, math doesn't make sense. Let's just stay here and then get rid of a lot of the stuff that we don't need. And then at that point, I stopped accumulating and starting to go more from the hoarder mindset to more of the minimalist mindset. So there was a lot of like ups and downs along the way, but I think the immigrant mindset plus the fact that I did the math compared to like the other apartments that we could have moved into, and realized that it doesn't make sense to keep all these things and then pay for it in order to just get a bigger place to pay for it. I'm going to lose more money by doing that instead of just throwing it away or giving it away.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Like it's you know, you can buy a lot of stuff, but your stuff will own you as much as you own it. You got to spend time maintaining, for sure. It can be freeing to really internalize the only a minimalist need. I definitely understand that. So when it comes to homeownership, I know from a bunch of other interviews you've done, and you know, you've alluded here earlier as well, that you decided against this common advice, buying a home. And if I understand correctly, it's because you view it as this illiquid debt sinkhole with ongoing maintenance costs and taxes. And I'd love to understand, is your opposition to homeownership about buying a primary residence, or also about investing in real estate?
I think mostly primary residence. I mean, we do own real estate investment trusts. That's basically commercial real estate, right?
Yeah.
So I think so basically, if you're buying something to invest and you can actually turn it into an asset that pays you, then that's an investment, and it makes sense. But most of the people that we're surrounded with, they don't really think in terms of investing in real estate. They think of buying like the biggest house you could possibly afford. Like, how many times have we heard that advice from our bosses, right? Buy as much house as you can afford, or even like stretch, right? It wasn't even as much as you can afford. It was like stretch as much as possible and buy the biggest house you possibly can, because that's what everyone else is doing, right? But in reality, it's like your primary residence is something you should buy to live in. It's not an investment. It's something that you're buying it for a lifestyle decision. It's not an investment. And I think for us, it's also how expensive the housing market is when you live in a major metropolitan city, right? Like when you're in Silicon Valley, you understand that the housing prices are insane, and does it make sense to actually buy there? Especially if you're planning to become retired later on, or you're planning to become location independent. Why would you live in a crazy expensive city like that when everything's crowded? And now that we have COVID, it makes even less sense. It's like there's more people around, you're higher risk of catching a disease in a really crowded city, and you're paying a premium to live there. It absolutely makes no sense, especially since as engineers, we are actually location independent. We don't need to live in an expensive city. So I would not actually be against buying like a smaller, more affordable house in a city, like a smaller city, a more family-friendly city that's not super expensive. And if I do the math and it makes sense to own versus rent in a smaller city, I would totally buy, right? It's just, I'm really not, I don't fall for that advice that everybody else is buying a house in Toronto and everything is going up, so you must do it.
Is it also like overpriced in this kind of, in where you are in California?
Oh yeah, it's a zoo.
Okay.
It's never not been a zoo. Yeah.
You get it. It's just, it's like everyone around you is doing that groupthink thing, and everyone is just loaded up with debt. But as we're seeing here, housing can go down, and a lot of, and you know, my mom was a real estate agent back in like the 80s, where there was, I don't even remember why it was, something to do with interest rates, but there was a sustained like downward trajectory for housing for a while. And she's just kind of like, people don't know what it's like. People our generation have never seen a declining stock market, housing market. They just think it's up and to the right. Houses never lose money. And then, but for mom, she was just kind of like, no. It's like, you haven't really quite tested a marriage. Like, you haven't really quite tested a marriage until you are trying to like, until you're dealing with like a foreclosed house that you then have to sell at a loss, right? And she's like, she used to do listings in which the people were just like at each other's throats because one of them talked the other person into buying too much house, and then it went the other way. So it's like, you know, it can go down, and as we're seeing now with COVID, it can go down, and when it does, it's very, very painful.
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to, you know, how you guys were accumulating your portfolio, you know, in America, there's like these different accounts. There's tax deferred, tax exempt, taxable accounts. Well, actually, first of all, are there similar constructs in Canada in terms of like how you invest in retirement?
Oh yeah, we steal all of our ideas from you guys. So
I'm sure we stole it from somebody.
Sure.
So I'm curious, like during your accumulation phase, what proportion of your savings were going into the different accounts like tax deferred, exempt, or taxable account? And by the time you retired, what proportion was in each bucket?
So basically the answer is we maxed out every account every year because it always makes sense to not pay taxes when you legally when you don't have to. And I think right now the proportion of our money that's in like retirement accounts is about 40% of the portfolio is there. But now that we're retired, we're withdrawing the money out and gradually like deregistering it and then paying. And if we do it carefully, you can do it in a way that's like tax-free.
Gotcha. And what were you investing in? It sounds like right now you have a combination of fixed income, equities, and REITs.
Yeah.
Was that the plan from the beginning and has held sort of true throughout?
We kind of learned as we went, but the advice that we give people is when they're accumulating and when they're still working, keep it simple and just buy the index. And the index is for you guys, it's the S&P 500. For us, it's the TSX, and as well as whatever international indexes like the EFI that would give you global exposure. But instead of betting on individual companies, you basically just buy all companies at the same time. And the reason why you do this is because while individual companies can go bankrupt, the index cannot, because the index is a combination of every company in the investable market. So while you are working, that's the way to go. And you usually want to go a little bit more aggressive, like 80% or even 90% equity. When you go to retirement, you can. It's important to start mixing in other asset classes like preferred shares, REITs, corporate bonds, that kind of stuff. And we write about that in the book as well as on the blog. So if your readers are interested in that, you can look at that for details.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So what was your allocation? What was your, I guess, in your personal portfolio situation, what was your allocation on the way toward FIRE, and how did that allocation shift? If there are percentage numbers you can give, that'd be super helpful. How did it shift once you were in retirement?
When I was just starting out, I was much more aggressive. I think it was like 75% equity. At the point where we retired, we had reduced that to around 60% equity, 40% fixed income. And now that we've been retired for 5 years, we're starting to gradually shift in the opposite direction. So getting out, and then I think right now we're 70% equity, 30% fixed income. And as our retirement portfolio grows and grows and grows, we'll need, you can shift even more into equity because you don't need as much fixed income, like you don't need as many bonds to keep paying you the interest. Got it.
And did you introduce alternative assets only after FIRE?
The kind of like the lead up into like the year or two before then, that's kind of when we put those in. But it can be like the point that you hit FIRE or even slightly afterwards, but we did it a little bit before because we wanted to make sure everything was doing what it was supposed to do.
Gotcha. When you were, I guess now that you're in retirement, is your drawdown strategy to focus on the, I thought I heard this, but I want to just make sure I understood correctly. Is your drawdown strategy to focus on the fixed income payments that are coming out of essentially your fixed income side of the portfolio, while leaving your equity holdings to just grow, or maybe you take dividends out of that, and that's why you can let the equity portion grow while keeping the fixed income portion relatively fixed, because you already essentially know what your expenses are going to be from year to year? Right.
So the combination of interest from the fixed income part of the portfolio, as well as dividends from preferred shares and the common equity, so just the index, that's the yield of your portfolio. So right now the yield on our portfolio total is paying about 3.5%. So every year, on a year when it's an up year, we harvest that yield, which will be about $35,000, and we might sell off a little bit of equity that's gone up in value to make up the additional 40. In a year that's down year, like likely what this one is going to be, we will still harvest that yield because that's money that your portfolio is paying you, and then we might take a year from the cash cushion to make up that 40, and then that's our budget for the year going forward. Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So how much did you guys actually have saved up when you finally pulled the trigger? We declared FI at 1 million. At 1 million. And I think it was like 1.1 or something like that when because we stayed. My boss had just had a kid, so and he was going on paternity leave. So like if he left and then I left, it'd be like the intern is now the boss, right? So it's like, okay, that's not, so I stayed behind to cover him while he was doing his paternity leave. And then when he came back, then I left. But that also gave me another 6 months of just pure savings. And that's when we decided, hey, we have this extra money that we weren't budgeting, so let's go travel. And then that's when we discovered, oh, traveling is actually cheaper than staying in one place. And then that's kind of where our lifestyle kind of came from. Gotcha.
Makes sense. Cool. So I'd love to shift to the fire part. So past accumulation, now you're fired. How did you break the news to your parents, and what was their reaction?
Well, you just told them and they said, great, so proud of you. And then my parents, I just procrastinated until it was 2 days before we're supposed to fly out and travel the world. And then I just told my dad, by the way, I quit my job, I'm traveling the world, I'm leaving forever. And I was like, okay, bye. And and then we had a big fight and it did not go well because my dad didn't really understand what I was doing. But then we already bought the ticket, so we left. And then as we were traveling around Europe, I kept getting emails from him every month saying you need to go back to work. This is a terrible thing that you're doing. It's okay, enough having fun, time to get back to work. So it didn't go well. And my mom was still hounding me to buy a house. It's okay, you need to liquidate your portfolio and buy a house. I found all these houses for you. You need to buy one now. So basically after we started the blog, and then we started getting media coverage. And so it wasn't until about 2 years after, maybe 2.5 years, almost 3 years after we retired, that my dad still, he was still hesitant, but he kind of started to see that other people saw that maybe I'm not an idiot, that maybe because we're not actually running back to work and we're not actually destitute, that maybe it's okay. And then over time, every year we come back and he's like, oh, you guys still haven't run out of money. That's interesting. And then he started reading the blog and he's like, oh, maybe this indexing thing you're talking about actually makes sense. And then I think the 4th year after we retired, he started to invest in index funds and using the investment workshop that we have on our blog. So it's gradually getting him over to our side, gradually helping my parents see what we're doing. And then now they finally get it. So now they're like, oh, you're going to be fine. They didn't even freak out during this whole COVID thing because I thought they were going to be like, oh my God, the stock market's crashing. What are you going to do? They're just like, okay, I trust that you know what you're doing. So yeah.
I'm curious as to if you have an opinion on this, because her theory is her experience was much more different. Even though we both came from Chinese backgrounds, her experiences was much more traditional. It's much more strict because her parents were Mandarin speaking. Mine came from Hong Kong. They're Cantonese speaking. So they were much more willing to accept that this kind of a more alternative lifestyle as long as the money was in place. Do you think that there's a big difference between those two cultures?
I don't know, and I have to confess I don't have an opinion about the difference between Mandarin versus Cantonese speak, if that has an influence. Hong Kong was, I guess, historically more exposed to British ideas earlier, and did that have an influence? I don't know. It's a sensible hypothesis. I do think that ultimately your parents do want you to be happy, even if they have different ways of expressing it, or even if they were raised at a time when the norms for happiness or the path to happiness was ingrained to be a specific way that doesn't feel like it resonates with you. And it sometimes just does take time to get them over to your side, like you said, and having their peers sort of vouch for you and bring the news articles, I think, doesn't hurt for sure.
Yeah. You know what? One of the things that I noticed is the language barrier. Because the thing is, I came to Canada when I was 8, right? So even though I can speak Mandarin, nobody ever taught me how to say ETF or index investing in Chinese. How are you going to explain that to your parents? Because those concepts didn't exist back then, right? So I think just trying to explain it to them in their own language, in a way that they would understand. It's already a complicated concept to explain, but you have to explain it to them in their own language. So that was a struggle. So I think if any of your listeners is having trouble trying to express it to their parents, I actually found this really great video that one of our readers made, and he's Taiwanese. He lives in Taiwan. I think he's Vietnamese, and he made this really good explanation for how FIRE works and what is index investing and how the 4% rule works. So I can send you that link. You can share.
Oh yeah, I love it. I'd love to share it out with our readers. For sure. That'd be super helpful. I've had
so many Chinese friends saying how do I explain this to my parents? I'm like, I can't explain it. They're like, I can't explain it. way beyond my language abilities. But he explained it really well.
Because it's like full joke, like that doesn't make any sense, right? But it's like, here's how I was finally able to get to explain this whole yield shield stuff to her parents. So I had to say it like, okay, you know how every Chinese New Year your uncle gives you a hongbao, like a red packet, and he goes, okay, now imagine if that uncle owns like a really big business and is giving you a hongbao as part of the profits that he made as like a part of his profits. And he goes, okay, fine. Now imagine an ETF owns many different companies, and the size of the hongbao depends on how much of that ETF you own. And he goes, okay. So now imagine if the hongbao amount was enough for you to live on every year. And he went, oh, okay, I understand that. And we had to go back in, like we had to really, it was really tough to explain because I don't even know what the Chinese word is for financial independence. Like, I don't know if that exists because, so we had to go back to something that he understood in his own language. And that took about 2 years to explain.
Oh, wow. I'm curious, like, what were they putting their money in, if not like stock investments, prior to learning this stuff from you guys?
The house.
The house. He also, her dad also worked for the federal government. So he had like a big pension that it was basically just handled for him. And then he could have taken that money and bought Bitcoin with it and he'd be totally fine because the pension was more than enough for him to live on. So he didn't need to learn any of this stuff. That's why he never did.
But my mom doesn't have a pension. So for her, it was like house. That's the only thing you got.
Yeah.
Gotcha. At some point, you finished paying off the house though, right? And then just put it in the bank?
What do you do with the money afterwards?
Yeah.
Well, my mom would just put it into a savings account because she doesn't understand that inflation erodes your money. Like, she doesn't understand that concept at all, right? So just like, well, what else is safer than a savings account? So just put it in a savings account and then do nothing with it and then just watch it and just, that's it, you're done.
Or more likely, she would have upgraded. She would have got a bigger house, or like bought an apartment building.
Oh, true. She might have upgraded the house. Yeah, she might have like upgraded. Yeah, either put it into a savings account or upgraded the house. That's the only concept they understand in terms of investing. I think I actually see this a lot with immigrants, especially that don't really trust the government. Like, they may have come from another country in which there's a totalitarian government, where they believe that if you put it into the stock market is rigged. In China, it is. So then the government could just take your money. So then the only way to actually preserve your money is to put it into a physical asset, right? Like, if you can't touch it and it's not tangible, then they don't trust it. So that seems to be ingrained in a lot of like immigrant mindset, especially people who came from places with totalitarian governments. Yeah,
I guess from their perspective, it does make sense. The fear is not totally irrational, given their life experience, for sure. Cool. So for the last 4 or 5 years, better part of 4 or 5 years, you guys have been essentially nomadic, full-time travelers. What are the most memorable places you've traveled to since you fired, and what made them memorable?
I think my favorite place is definitely Chiang Mai, Thailand. And it was also the most surprising place because we almost didn't go there because we thought it would be too dangerous.
Yeah, it was right around that that shrine bombing happened in 2015, 16. It was like
16.
It was that
2015. Yeah.
Yeah, it was that
Irvine
shrine
bombing
in Bangkok, and we're just kind of like, there's like ISIS militants operating in Thailand, and we were in Malaysia at the time. We almost didn't go, but I'm so glad we did.
Oh, I'm so glad we went
because our friend Jeremy from Go Curry Cracker. He happened to be in
Chiang Mai
at the time. And we were fans of his, so we wanted to go up and meet him. And he was like, "Yeah, sure, come on up." So that made us like go take the train from Malaysia, went up to Chiang Mai, and then we just fell in love with the city. And now we were just there at the beginning of this year too. Man, I wish I was there right now.
Well, were you guys in Thailand when COVID hit?
Yep. When COVID hit, there was actually people from Wuhan that were traveling into Chiang Mai. And the minute that, so we still didn't quite know what was going on at the time.
This was back in January.
This was back in January. We're just kind of like, it's starting to, we're hearing these stories of this thing that's happening in Wuhan. And the Thai government was like, is it here? Is it not here? And we're not sure. But immediately when there was rumors that it's starting to spread here, everybody wore masks. Everybody, like without an exception.
Yeah.
Like the day, everybody was wearing a mask, including us. And if you didn't wear a mask, people would like would tell you, hey, cut that out, put that mask back on. So like, I think, and that's kind of the attitude that has been happened all over Southeast Asia, whether it was Taiwan or Singapore, or Malaysia, or not so much Indonesia, but Vietnam definitely. The minute anybody knew about this thing, everyone was wearing masks, and that's why the death rates have been continuing to be so low in Southeast Asia. There's like 25 deaths in Thailand, like total, and in Vietnam they have 0. So it's like seeing the difference of the response in Asia versus in the U.S. has been very, very frustrating.
When did you guys decide to make the decision to repatriate versus stay? Because I'm sure at some point you were like, do we stay or go?
Yeah, it was kind of a tough decision, right? Because we wanted to just ride out the pandemic either in Thailand or Taiwan.
Yeah.
Because we knew that Taiwan's response was really good at the time. Our government did say that it was a good idea to come back, but I think at that point, even with that, we were thinking maybe we should stay in Asia. But we had a family emergency, so we actually had to come back.
We had to come back for an unrelated reason, and then now we're waiting for everything to kind of open back up again.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, pre-COVID anyway, all this craziness. When you guys were traveling full-time, normally, do you always travel together, or do either of you ever travel solo without the other? And how do you decide?
Oh, we're always together. When we travel, it's basically just the two of us with our backpacks, and then that's everything we own in the world.
Gotcha. How do you decide? Sorry, go ahead.
In terms of location, for the first year or 2 years, it was just hit as many countries as possible. So we did an entire thing. We spent like 6 months in Europe bouncing around between, no, it would have been 3 months in Europe because of that 90-day Schengen thing. So we were bouncing around like Europe, and then after our visa was up, we flew over to Asia, and then we started exploring Southeast Asia there too, as well as Japan and this kind of, and then a few years after that, it was like we went down to South America, and we kind of spent like a few months in Mexico. We were just kind of like sampling everywhere and just kind of seeing like what cities that we really liked. It turns out Thailand, specifically Chiang Mai, really, really high up on that list. But also places that we really enjoyed were Eastern Europe, so Poland.
Oh yeah, Lithuania, Latvia,
and Estonia.
Estonia, that was very surprising. Because not a lot of people go there. It's very underrated.
And Portugal, I love Portugal. I think of Portugal, I think of those like Portuguese egg tarts, and I'm just kind of like, oh man.
Pastel de nata.
Pastel de nata. Yeah.
Wow. How do you decide where to go and how long to stay? And how does, budget and notion of safe withdrawal rate influence those decisions?
I think initially it was just put as many of our bucket list items on there as possible, like places that we could never get to when we were working because we only had 2 weeks of vacation a year. And then I think as time went on, it became opportunities. Like when we were invited to speak in the UK, for example, it's like, oh, we're going to the UK. So since we're going to be there, like where around the UK can we travel to? Oh, look, there's a flight to Germany. Let's go there. Now it's actually turned more towards the social aspect of it. It's like meeting our friends who live in different places all over the world. And we met them as a result of some of these conferences, one of them being Chautauqua. And so like we have friends in New Zealand. We were going to visit them before this whole thing, before COVID hit. We have friends in Germany, UK, Ecuador. So it's like people invite us to go visit them. And it's kind of like the world became one city and we're just visiting our friends in different neighborhoods. So I think over time, it's less been about the travel and more about the people.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really great. Did you travel continuously, or do you return to Canada for stretches at a time? And has that changed?
Yeah, we come back at least once a year, every year, to see family and catch up with our friends. And
yeah, during the summer when it's livable.
Yeah, we can't do snow anymore, man. I don't miss that at all. But so this is the first year we've been back. We were forced to be back when there was snow on the ground, and it reminded me of how much I hated snow.
Yeah, we sent messages to our friends in giant cap letters saying, "Why is it still snowing in May?" And they're like, "It's Canada. Like, what do you think? That's why."
You're in California. Your weather's perfect all the time when you don't have forest fires or whatever.
Oh yeah, that's true. How does I'm curious, like, in what ways does travel feel different to you as a long-term traveler versus just a vacation traveler? Yeah, I mean, is there slow travel, loneliness, homesickness? Were those ever issues, and how did you deal with them?
Slow travel, yeah, you become less of there's a difference between a tourist and a traveler, because a tourist, you kind of like to come in, like tourists like to come into a city and like absorb the culture and this kind of stuff. Whereas when you're a slow traveler, you kind of want to integrate with it more, right? You want to get to know the cities, you want to get to know where the locals are, not just the tourist traps and like the castles and like the kind of places where all these Chinese bus tours are going to, but you're actually like living there and cooking and meeting friends and like kind of getting there to see how the people there live and try to, and you get to actually participate in that, right? It was in Spain that they introduced us to the joys of jamon, like the
ham,
that Spanish ham
Mm-hmm.
thing, and I was like, oh man, I didn't know that this stuff could be so good. Portugal, that I learned that it was just kind of like I learned how important port is and how awesome it is, and they like every night we'd be like a glass of port and some cheese, and I was like, all right, these guys know how to live. I like how these guys work. And of course in Chiang Mai, it's like all the Asian food everywhere, all the night markets. I mean, like the thing that we love about the cities that you don't get to see as a tourist is like kind of what the locals do for fun and to blow off steam and like how they live, because like the Thai night markets are like my favorite thing in the world to do.
Yeah, because I think when you're going on vacation, you don't have enough time. You have like 2 weeks, 3 weeks maximum. So you don't have time to absorb any of the culture. You don't have time to go to the local places and eat the local food. You're basically just have this checklist of like big things, mostly overrated things that you want to check off so that you can go home and brag to your friends about all the places you've been to. But when you actually have time to slow down and absorb the culture, you really do need at least a month to really get to know the place, because without meeting the locals and without them taking you to all the local hangouts and explaining the history of their food and the history of their culture, you don't really understand a place. You just skimming the surface. So I think over time, and picking up the different languages, like learning different words in those different languages, now it's really, the travel has become about learning and not just consuming. So I think vacation is about consuming versus long-term travel is about learning and bettering yourself, because it really does open up your mind to the different cultures, and it makes you quite humble, because it makes you realize how insignificant you are in the grand scheme of things, right? Like a lot of people in the States, when they go to other countries, they're like, oh, what do people think about us? Like, what do the people think about the Americans? You guys must be talking about us all the time. And the thing is like, not really. Everybody's doing their own thing. They're thinking about their own country. They're not really thinking about you at all, right? So you just realize you're very insignificant in the grand scheme of things.
That's a really interesting distinction between consuming versus learning. I hadn't heard it framed that way before, but definitely resonates. Did you guys ever struggle with loneliness?
Oh yeah.
I mean, we had each other. There are certain, so if you're traveling, which we write about on the blog, everyone just goes, oh wow, it's so glamorous. And it is pretty awesome. But I have seen some travelers get burnt out and want to go back home. And most of the time it's like single people. It's really tough to date when you are a long-term traveler, right? Because everyone you meet is like on the way out to somewhere else. And you meet each other in the hostels, and then, one night stands might be fun for a while, but it's really hard to get like a long-term relationship while you're on the road. And I know only of one couple that was successfully able to do that. Like they had to meet each other and then meet each other in another city and then start like changing their travel plans so they could travel together. But that's pretty rare.
I think our loneliest experience was initially when we went to Mexico and we didn't really speak Spanish. I think for Americans, you guys have an advantage because we learned French in school. We don't learn Spanish. So I didn't know how to say anything, like even most basic Spanish. So it's really fish out of water feeling. And I didn't really know any of the locals. And it eventually, because we met up with people in our Airbnb host introduced us to some of their friends, and then picking up some Spanish words here and there, taking some private lessons in Oaxaca. That helped us get more used to the language and getting to know the people and things like that. So it can feel, even if you're a couple traveling together, it can feel isolating if you're in a country in which you don't really know the language or the customs in the beginning when you're trying to learn.
Do you guys take language classes in a lot of the places that you go to?
I was using Duolingo for a while. So in the beginning, it was very difficult because we were moving different countries like every couple of days. Maybe we stayed in a country the longest for a week. So it was very hard to absorb any of that. Just everything kept changing. But now I think as we're recognizing where our community is and where our favorite spots are, we end up going and learning like more of the languages, like trying to take classes with like local teachers and online classes and things like that. So it's gotten a lot better.
Yeah, initially the first thing that we did when we went into a city is to like find the local Chinatown.
Just ask them in Mandarin.
Because then you'll be able to communicate them instantly. And there's
Oh,
Chinese
that's
people
funny.
everywhere.
Then you get all the tips, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And then you can start talking to them. We were like in Panama. And then
Panama.
And then we found Chinatown there, and they're just kind of like, what are you guys doing in Panama? And then her family was like railroads, and I was like, why is it always railroads? Like,
yeah. The Chinese diaspora is vast, so you can usually find some Chinatown or some Chinatown community in most places you go, which is one of the benefits.
Yeah, that's our cheat code for when we don't know language yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because after you have been to so many different countries, I think we've been to over 40 now in the last 5 years, is like you end up getting confused with the code switching between countries. So when we were in Germany, I think you said hola to the person there.
I mean, I would forget which country I'm in. I'm going to start speaking Portuguese to the Germans, and then they're like, what? So it's like,
Or we say like obrigada instead of Dankeschön in Germany, and then people are like, what? Like, wait, hold on. Which country are we in again? Give me a second to figure out which word should I be saying.
Yeah. What is the community of long-term nomadic travelers like as you've experienced it? Like the sense of camaraderie, if any?
There are, I mean, like the fire people who are also traveling, there's not a lot of it. We're basically it, as well as like, 2 or 3 people that we know of, because retiring early is really rare. Long-term travel is really rare. So the combination of that is extremely rare. The closest analog that I was able to find out there of a group of long-term traveling community, it's called the Digital Nomads. And these are the people who, got fed up with their corporate job in America, and then they took their laptops and they started traveling and then building like a web-based business, like a blog or a podcast or Amazon FBA, which is really, really popular. So there were, and these are the guys that go to like co-working spaces, and they all tap on their laptops and they know each other. So when there is no one that we know there from the fire community, that's another community that we sometimes hook up with. We just went to a digital nomad conference that was happening in Chiang Mai. So we met up with a bunch of them, and it turns out some of them even knew who we were, because they were doing this like digital nomad stuff, and then they stumbled across the fire blogs, and then they kind of went down the rabbit hole that way. So yeah, but the big difference is those guys still need to keep working, because they're not actually retired, but they simply moved their job into like the digital online sphere and are continuing to build their businesses and work while they're traveling.
Gotcha. Interesting. So throughout all this time, the last 4 or 5 years that you guys have been traveling, have there been any large unexpected expenses that have come up that have put stress on your retirement finances?
Yep. There was 2 incidences in which we had like his grandparents passed away, and then we had to cancel a lot of hotels and then like book plane tickets last minute to fly back. But luckily, because we bought travel insurance, so we bought like World Nomad insurance to cover all our medical expenses, and then trip cancellation was also part of that. So they actually covered what would have been $3,000 to $5,000 of unexpected expenses, like very last minute. So, which is why we like to have all these backup plans, because it's like, what's the worst case that could happen? Okay, so if we're going to be out this much amount of money, we need to have insurance to cover it in case it's some sort of medical bill that costs us like hundreds of thousands of dollars, or we have to cancel our trip. What do we do in that case?
Yeah,
so, yeah,
that was the biggest one. Medical, you think it'd be medical, but medical is actually quite affordable outside the U.S. I mean, like you guys have this.
Oh yeah, it's very topsy-turvy here.
Yeah, but when we go into like a doctor in like Portugal or Poland, like the bills will come back to be like $50.
Yeah, like getting our teeth cleaned in Poland was like, I think it's like $30 to $40 per person. And then when we were in Malta, he had this really bad rash on his side, and we went to see a doctor, and they didn't know what to do with us, because they were like, oh, you don't have European passports. And then we just showed them our Canadian passports. They're like, okay. They just sent us in to see the doctor, and we're like, I'll just pay with cash afterwards. And then afterwards I was like, oh, it's going to be a couple $100. I don't know how much this is going to be. And then they're just like, it's fine. Don't worry about it. I'm like, don't worry about it. They're like, I don't know what to do to charge you. You're not European citizens. Don't worry about it. And then we took the prescription they gave us to buy the cream, and it was like €2.
Yeah,
Like, what?
because she's being paid by the government, so she gets paid
She
no matter
doesn't
what.
matter. She
So
doesn't
she's
care.
just kind of
Yeah.
like, I
She's
can't figure out how to make the
like, don't
computer
worry about
system
it.
take your money.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah, even coming back to Canada, so we always buy expat insurance. Initially, we bought travel insurance, but after the first 2 years, we lost our Canadian medical insurance while traveling. So now we have to buy expat insurance. So we're like similar to your situation as American. Well, we don't have Canadian health insurance when we were traveling around. So you have to buy expat insurance that covers any kind of medical needs, right? And then when we come back in the summer, we have to pay out of pocket when we come back to Canada. And even then, we went to see the doctor. It was like $40.
Yeah.
Right. So even then, it was like not crazy expensive.
Oh, wow. So this is super interesting, because I thought healthcare is universal in Canada, but it sounds like you can lose it. How do you lose it?
Yeah.
So if you're outside of the country for more than, I believe, 7 months
Out of the year,
then you lose your coverage, and then we just became uninsured. So we had to buy private insurance just like you guys, and we even used similar companies that you guys are used to, like Aetna, Cigna, and like these kinds of companies offer expat insurance. But because the cost of healthcare is so much cheaper outside of the US, because we were not actually physically present in the US, the price of the plan was like almost nothing. It was like $100 a month for the two of us. And
Oh, wow.
or like $500,000 of expenses.
And that covered us everywhere except the US. If we had set foot inside the US, we'd have to buy additional supplementary insurance, which costs like 3 or 4 times more.
Holy moly. So
it's like, to some of the readers or some of the people that ask us about what do I do about health insurance, it's like, get out of the US, like honestly, because as soon as you get out of the US, you don't have to worry about it anymore. Even if you have to pay for it out of pocket, it doesn't cost that much.
So can you guys reinstate your Canadian insurance, or is it lost for good?
Oh, no. Once you settle back in Canada and you stay there for more than like 90 days, then your insurance comes back.
Yeah, but there's like a holding period. So when you come back, you have to get additional insurance, because let's say you come back to Canada and like the first month you find out you have cancer or something, right? You have to wait at least like 2 more months before you actually have any coverage. So we basically just cover any kind of gap that we have with additional insurance.
Oh, wow. I see. But I guess even during that gap period, you don't get excluded because of a pre-existing condition or anything like that.
No. That's
a very American concept.
Very American.
Yeah. I see. Interesting. So it sounds like when you were traveling, so I'm curious, like, how does it work for expatriate Canadians who are just like working abroad? Do they lose their insurance too?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
So they would lose their Canadian health insurance, and they would, for expat Canadians, they would get a work visa. They would then move to the new country, and then that new country, whether it's Portugal or whatever, they would then fall under their system. So Jeremy from Gold Curry Cracker, he because his wife is Taiwanese, he moved to Taiwan, and after staying there for a certain amount of time, he became eligible for Taiwanese health insurance. So he's covered under the Taiwanese health system.
I see.
We're a little weird in that we move around between countries basically using tourist visas so often that we never actually become
tax resident,
resident in any other country. So we don't stay in a country long enough to become covered under their health insurance system. So we have to buy supplementary insurance it's called expat insurance. And it's just, your own insurance companies sell them. They're American insurance companies.
Got it. So it sounds like when you're traveling, that's how you do health insurance, through these expat insurance schemes. Gotcha.
Yep.
And since you guys mentioned it, what country do you file taxes under?
We continue to file taxes under the Canadian taxes, because if I were to stay for, I think the requirement is like 6 months plus a day, like 183 days, like the magical number. That's when you become tax resident of a new country, in which case you become non-resident of your old country and become tax resident of your new country. But because I never stay in any place long enough to become tax resident in a new country, I retain my old country's tax residence. So I still continue to pay Canadian taxes and file tax returns back in Canada as if I live there, but I don't.
I see. Gotcha.
Cool. You guys, I think, have a citizenship-based taxation system. So no matter where you live, you have to keep filing American taxes, but there's something called the
foreign earned income exclusion. Yeah. That it's another one of these like quirks about America, that Americans are taxed on a worldwide basis. Like by breathing, you're taxed anywhere in the world. The only place you're exempt is on an intergalactic scale, if you're like outside of the Earth. Yeah, Uncle Sam is definitely going to be after you. But you get some credit back if you're taxed by local authorities as well, up to a limit.
Yeah. Like, and there's like the American tax system is amazingly complicated. Jeremy's site, Go Curry Cracker, that he spends all of his day figuring out how to stack all the different like systems together so that you end up not paying any taxes. Because he doesn't. But I'm reading some of his stuff and it's incredibly dense, and I was like, oh man, this seems like a lot of work.
Yeah, he's definitely an optimizer, but if you don't have to deal with that because you don't owe US taxes, then you can sidestep all that stuff for sure.
Sure. It's because he earns money from his blog that he has to report. If he were just purely retired and not earning anything, then he wouldn't pay taxes.
Yeah. So after all this time, you guys been sort of free for 5 years. What does your portfolio look like now, 5 years later?
We have earned some money from our book. We've earned money from our blog, but we keep it separately in another in another account because we're still living off of the initial amount that we saved up because we want to keep the experiment as pure as possible. But if I could but I think at the beginning of the year, we were sitting on like $1.4 million. It's gone up during the past 5 years, and we've kept our spending at $40,000. We haven't really even needed to adjust for inflation. But the stock markets have been rampaging, and then of course COVID hit. So now it's somewhere between that and 1.2. I think.
I think it's recovered a lot though. Like we're still only down about 2 to 4%.
Yeah.
And this year our cost of living has actually plummeted, shockingly, because I was like, we're going to come back to Toronto. Everything's going to be expensive. It's going to be super annoying. And somehow it's not. And I'm projected to spend about $35,000 to $36,000 this year because COVID has made it so you can't spend any money even if you want to. Nothing is open.
And so what we didn't realize is that in the years that since we left Toronto, and I'm assuming a lot of big cities in the US, Airbnbs have just sprung up everywhere, where people have started buying up like 15 units of like condo units and then running them as like hotels. And this was having the effect of making the housing market even more expensive because now you have like 15 units that you can't like give to the residents of the country, and it's just making everything worse. And then once COVID hit, tourism dried up overnight. Like all of these Airbnbs, they couldn't list at all. So we were like downtown right in the middle of the city, sitting when we first came back, and we were self-isolating at the time because we had just returned back to Canada. And it was like a unit that was right next to CN Tower, where it was normally would have cost something like $100 to $200 US dollars a night.
115 up per night US dollars, and then it plummeted down to $39 US dollars a night.
Wow.
And this is like a bedroom. Yeah. On the 33rd floor overlooking the CN Tower.
Because nobody could rent to anybody. So they had to drop their prices down like precipitously.
Significantly.
So now, so all these units that were now empty Airbnb units that the owners are now panicking because they're cash flow negative. Like they're now being forced to put them onto the rental market, and it's actually causing rents to like drop because there's all these units coming on board. So in a strange way enough, like we've actually been able to save money by coming back to Toronto, living in the highest cost city of Toronto.
It's crazy. Like I was looking at our April expenses, and in April we spent less money living in Toronto, the most expensive city in Canada. We spent less living here than we did in Thailand in January.
Yeah,
that's insane. That's insane, guys.
It's crazy. I couldn't believe it.
Because the restaurants are closed down too.
We had to learn how to cook.
Yeah.
I'm sure after great Thai food for cheap, that's hard to give up. Yeah.
I was like, what is this? We went from always eating out and getting massages every day to cooking every single meal. Yeah. I was like, what? We're not going to be able to do this. Yeah, but no, we picked up some skills inadvertently as a result of this.
Yeah. So you guys are basically living at hostel rates, but in a condo high rise. Are Airbnb owners starting to liquidate their homes and actually sell them? And is that having an impact, as far as you can tell, on sale prices?
Yeah, it's starting to come up. And there is this, so back in March when COVID officially hit like the US and Canada, a lot of banks allowed more people to defer the mortgages for 6 months or so, right? So that helped and prevented people from needing to panic sell. But those 6 months are going to be up in September. So there's this thing that housing analysts are talking about called the deferral cliff, where like if the jobs are not back by September, their mortgage is going to restart again, and then they'll be either forced to sell or just lose money. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when September rolls around, because, and this is going to be for you guys as well as us, where it might actually cause a housing crash because everyone's going to be selling at the same time.
Yeah, it could be a good, if you have cash to invest, it could be a good opportunity to buy stuff.
We were thinking about it, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Cool.
It has to be at the right price.
Hey, when you guys think about the career and life paths of classmates and peers, one thing I'm curious about, you guys sound, really grounded, very healthy, in terms of like where your mindset is. How do you not let what, your old friends and peers are doing get to your head? Whatever success they may be having, whatever pretty Instagram lives they may be living, is that something you ever grapple with?
No, we're living the pretty Instagram lives. We're those,
yeah.
We're the people that make them feel bad.
Actually, we went back to visit his coworkers. Actually, the first year they were making jokes and saying like, "Oh, in 2 years from now, you guys will be crawling back. What kind of pillows would you like for your knees so that you don't scrape them?" Like that kind of thing, right? And then we came back and last year, because we were doing our book promotion, and after telling them about our trip, because a lot of people were asking us like, where did you travel to? What's it been like being retired and all that stuff. And about half an hour of this later, his ex-boss was like, "You know what, guys? I think it's time to go."
Yeah, you got to get out of the office.
And I'm like,
because I was making it seem too glamorous.
Yeah, I'm like, see, this is what happens when you let in the riffraff.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's on you.
So funny. That's so funny.
Letting us in.
As you've gotten older, I'm curious, has your perspective changed at all in terms of whether this current nomadic long-term travel path you're on is something you would like to continue forever? Do you ever have any tugs to, settle down or start a family? And if so, how do you wrestle with these thoughts?
I think it would just look different. Like we're always going to be traveling in some capacity. Maybe we won't be, if we end up having kids, we maybe won't be like, flying back and forth between here and Thailand, but maybe we'll get an RV and then drive around Canada, or maybe go to Australia and drive around Australia. So I think it's going to change. And then maybe we'll try to do world schooling, because I always found that community really interesting. But I don't think we're ever going to just settle down in one area. I just don't think it fits our personality. It's like we like meeting new people and we like learning too much. I feel like the challenge of having to change locations, like even in Toronto right now, we're changing Airbnbs and trying out different parts of the city. And I find that interesting because it challenges my brain to have to problem solve. Like if I just stay in one place for 10 years, I find my brain kind of, it gets too boring, and my brain just kind of filters, like every day ends up being the same and it's not challenged enough. So, but that's my perspective. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I don't think I think that travel is a kind of a permanent part of our lifestyle, but it will likely slow down when it has when we have kids. It won't be like, oh, okay, now change your Airbnb every 3 days or something like that. It would be like, okay, we're going to spend our winter in Portugal, and then after that we're going to go here, and then we're going to come back for 5 months, and then so it'll change, it'll slow down, but I think it'll always be like that. I mean, like I caught you the other day looking at flights to Portugal because she's starting to get like
getting antsy.
Are they open yet? Are they opening the borders? And so it's like, yeah, I don't think that will ever become like just a suburban family.
So when all the COVID stuff, finally comes to an end, hopefully sooner rather than later, what adventures from your bucket list are coming up that we should keep an eye out for in terms of future Kristy and Bryce sightings?
I think we'd like to meet our friends somewhere between here and the UK. So one of the things we were talking about is going to the Azores. It's actually relatively underrated. Hopefully it stays that way. I don't know for how much longer, but it's only about a 5-hour flight away. And then we have friends in Europe where it would like make sense for us to meet in the middle.
Other Chautauqua coming up.
Yeah,
so
next year.
This year Chautauqua just got creamed for obvious reasons. But next year we're looking into Croatia as an interesting kind of place to be. Game of Thrones is kind of where Game of Thrones was filmed. So we'll likely be there for next year after that. And then who knows? There's
maybe writing another book.
Yeah, we're thinking of we're planning out another book that that's going to be, yeah, I'm not sure what it's going to be yet, but we're working on another book. So that's also fun.
Got it. Well, listen, Kristy and Bryce, this has been super enjoyable, insightful. I've loved our conversation. I think there's a lot of just nuggets of insight packed for our listeners. Where can our listeners find out more about you, what you're up to, all the good stuff you've got going on?
Yeah, so you can contact us on our blog at www.millennial-revolution.com. And all our social media contacts are on there. I don't use social media that often, so it's probably better to send us an email. And then you can find our book, Quit Like a Millionaire, in basically any book near you. It's sold in all bookstores. And yeah, looking forward to hearing from you.
Cool. Well, we'll look forward to sharing this with our audience, and we'll share all those links in the show notes. And thank you so much again for taking the time to chat. And you know, all best wishes on getting through COVID in Toronto and all your travels beyond.
Thanks.
Cheers. Take care.
Take care.